Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special podcast that I'm doing about otaku terminology, I guess, or anime fan community words and definitions. I've got with me two very special guests. The first is the Pedantic Romantic, or what would you like us to call you?
Lachlan's fine.
All right, we'll refer to you as Lachlan. You'll find him as Lachlan Still in the comments, or as the Pedantic Romantic, anime YouTuber who's doing some great analytical content, sort of a new up-and-comer. And we also have here Pause and Select, who I guess we'll be calling Joe.
Yep, that works.
And he's also an analytical YouTuber, very academic in his approach to anime conversation, brings in interviews with some pretty famous anime academics lately, right? I would say.
Yeah, you had Thomas Lamar on just a week or so ago, right?
Yeah, famous in the context of academics, I would say.
Yeah. We're going to be talking about terms in the anime community and anime fandom that are maybe somewhat confusing, some confusing for newcomers, and some confusing for people who've even people who've been around forever. Some of these words have gotten so out there that I don't even really know what they mean anymore. And the first one I want to talk about, which I just made a whole vlog about, is the word moe. As I understand it, you guys have both read a book called The Moe Manifesto. Yeah?
Yep.
Would one of you like to describe what that book's about? Because it's sort of an interesting take on trying to define this word.
I assume Joe's the expert on it, so he can go ahead.
So the Moe Manifesto is essentially a book that's been compiled by Patrick Galbraith of Duke University. And it's a very fascinating book because it's essentially a book that's trying to reach out to a lay audience. Now, Galbraith's work is really interesting because most of his work focuses on moe reading habits and lolicon. So it's all about sort of this idea of otaku sexuality, but it's in this negotiated Western Eastern space where he's trying to mix them both. For the Moe Manifesto specifically, it's a book that every chapter is a particular specialist or someone who works in the general large field of anime and manga that essentially gets at the critical idea of what is moe. And they all have very different answers as to what moe is, and it really depends on the person they're talking about. So it's not a book that's essentially saying this is what moe is and what it's not. These are what they think moe is. And so you can get at some really interesting ideas that come about it. It's not meant to be a book that gives you a definitive answer. It's more so a book that really shows how complex the word really is.
Yeah, and that's what I find the most fascinating is that like even at best at the academic level, at the level of like interviewing everyone, taking all the opinions and trying to get to the heart of it, the heart of moe is that it means something totally different to almost everybody.
That being said, he does lay out a sort of definition as best you can for it in the intro. So he describes it as an affectionate response to fictional characters with three key features. It's a response to something that is done. It's situated in the people responding to those characters. It's not inherent in the characters themselves, which sort of gets at that subjectivity of it. Right. And then the response is triggered by fictional characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are all fair qualifications, but probably not ones understood by a lot of people who use the word moe, which is like what I find fascinating about it. Like, I made this video basically saying everyone has different meanings for moe, so how useful is this term? And a lot of comments on my video were people explaining what they think moe means and saying, doesn't everyone understand it to mean this? And then I go, well, if you look 2 comments down, you'll find another guy who thinks everyone understands it to mean something else, you know? It just, like, I mean, yeah, those definitions are what I thought was classically what moe was. Like, back in the mid-2000s, I don't know, how long have you guys been a part of the anime community and hearing these kinds of terms? I want to know.
Part of the anime community. I've only really been part of the community since 2014, 2015, I would say.
I've been watching it since around 2011, but really only since I got onto YouTube in 2013 and 2014, and just arguing in comment sections incessantly, have I been interacting with the community at large.
So, given that both of you are more new to the community, I'd be curious to know, like, what was your first exposure to the word moe? Like, what was the first context you heard it in, or the first way that you understood it? Starting with Joe.
I don't remember. Honestly,
Lachlan,
I'll give you a moment to think about it. Probably for me, because Arcada...
It doesn't have to be the literal first, just like the general...
Yeah.
What did you come to understand it as in the beginning?
It was key adaptations and then K-On! Were sort of like two ends of the spectrum of what...
So it was a show. Like a show was a moe show.
Yeah, it was a genre or style descriptor.
See, that's what interests me about it, because I think that's how most people see it these days. Like, if you were new... If someone comes into the anime fandom now... and they hear about moe, they usually hear it in terms of, like, that is a moe show. Like, people saying, wow, you watch lots of moe. You watch lots of moe anime. Whereas, like, back when I first started hearing it in, like, 2006 was about when I got into the kind of fandom that would use the term moe, which was mostly people who were... sort of like a bridge between the Japanese and American fandoms. Because I feel like there's the Japanese fandom, there's the Western fandom, and then there's this like interstice of the people who are like, this was especially true back in the day when fan subbing was a thing, and it's like the people who were watching the stuff as it was airing in Japan were sort of almost closer to the Japanese fandom than they were to a lot of the other Western fandom. Do you get what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And so like I feel like when moe first started getting used in the West, it was more informed by the Japanese usage. It was more like we were saying it because they were saying it, and we were learning it from stuff like Lucky Star, where they started commenting on it and having characters talk about moe. And, Konata tries to define it, and even she is like having a difficult time explaining to a non-otaku what does moe mean, because it was kind of a feeling you felt towards a character. There wasn't really that idea of the moe show at the time. It was more like I observe moe, the moment. It's not that a character is moe, it's that the moment she falls on her face, that's the moe. Like the moment when she says "ow" at the end of a sentence, that's the moe. The moment that makes you say moe, as Travis Touchdown does. I was wondering where I'd heard it before, and it was from No More Heroes, the game, said in that exact way. But yeah, and then like I guess over time, there became like a conflation of the two. Like if a show has moe, it is moe, and I guess because the shows that conveyed moe had a certain kind of aesthetic, then as that aesthetic became more popular, it became identified as like moe as like this art movement. And I'm curious, like in like the Moe Manifesto and in Japan in general, or in your academic research, Joe, how do they usually present moe? Like, is it ever taken as an art style in the way that Westerners seem to understand it?
Well, it does. So it's a very sort of strange relationship that's happening, because when we're talking about something like a moe style, that itself is really heavily debated. I mean, the Moe Manifesto talks about one of the instances in the Moe Manifesto. They talk about one of the characters in Gundam, one of the characters in the original Gundam, how she herself was moe.
Would it be Char's sister, or who was it?
It might be. I don't remember. Lachlan might be able to check it up while I'm rambling like a lunatic here.
Yeah.
But so when we talk about there does definitely seem to be some sort of vague constructed style that seems to at least attempt to elicit the feeling of moe.
Yeah, that I can definitely agree with, and I think that one of my problems with the way moe is used is that it's so often used by people who couldn't recognize that style, who are lumping it in with other stuff that kind of looks similar, if you get what I mean. Like, like someone pointed out to me that in Shirobako they say they're making a moe style anime, you know, and I totally get that, because when I think moe, I don't think of a genre. I don't think of it being like either cute girls doing cute things or like a romance. So it's more like we're going for this atmosphere of moe. And when you look at like the shows like Girls und Panzer and Saki, like what they have in common is the moe, whereas they're not really the same genre. And so I think moe is more like like an atmosphere, like a feeling that the show gives you, as opposed to like saying anything about what the show's actually about or like who the characters are. It's like this sort of thing that it's like, you know it when you see it, but you have to know it. You know what I mean? I don't know if that's confusing or too vague.
No, that makes sense. I mean, there's got to be this sort of moment where it is trying to elicit or at least capture this feeling of moe. I think it still very much is sort of the moe feeling, you know, the burning or the bursting, or however you want to take a look at it, you know, this feeling of moe. But the art styles that we are seeing are definitely trying to elicit this particular feeling that we're having. I think one of the things that sort of get latched onto that's really important for this discussion is this more of a quote-unquote moe age than previous ages? Because I think that's sort of one of the things that people, when they sort of respond...
I do think that's an interesting question, because when I look at like a lot of older writing about anime, I haven't read a whole ton of it, but when I see magazine articles and stuff from the 80s talking about like something like, I remember seeing a ranked list of the best lollies in anime from like 1988, and it's like Nazca is at the top of the list.
Yep.
You know, like this is considered Lolita. This is considered moe at the time, because when you think about what feelings Nazca elicits, it's not very different from what is elicited by the so-called moe shows. You know, it's not really so much that the art necessitates that, as that like it's just how the character is, and I think so many of these moe artists are following from that place where Nazca's kind of the mysterious girl who's extremely kind-hearted, who's like basically a goddess in the context of the series. Like everyone kind of worships her the way that an otaku worships their moe goddess, you know? And it makes me think, well, is that any different just because the art's different and it comes from visionary director Hayao Miyazaki, man who was who had a waifu himself in, what was it, Hakujaden? Is that the film that his waifu comes from?
Yep, Legend of the White Serpent, yeah.
Yeah, for anybody who doesn't know this story, there's an interview where Hayao Miyazaki mentions having gone to see Hakujaden over and over again because the main girl in the movie was like a girlfriend to him at a time when he didn't have a girlfriend, which is literally describing a waifu. And this is the same man who everyone thinks is decrying the current state of the anime industry because it's too moe or something.
On the subject of Mobile Suit Gundam, it's brought up fairly often throughout Moe Manifesto, and they reference Tomino's approach to crafting characters towards more nuanced character writing, and that creating the sort of investment that does evoke moe. And so it's sort of the advancement of anime storytelling that was important to the rise of moe.
I would definitely say, I know, because people talk about Gundam here and there, but if you look at like Double Zeta, which is one of the less popular Gundam shows because it's really bad, but that show feels like a fucking moe like rom-com show. Like I watched an episode of it and it feels like Ranma at times or something. Like, I mean, in Ranma, I think feeds into a lot of what modern rom-coms are. Like a lot of it feels like Rumiko Takahashi work. I think she informed a lot of the style of these modern shows, but like, Yeah, if you look at Double Zeta, the character Puru, which is just this lolly girl who's like who basically exists to be a cute lolly, and she's got like a bunch of clones that they're all fighting each other, and it's really stupid and ridiculous, and it's like nothing's changed. When you watch that show, you really feel, oh wow, this is every bit as dumb as what people are complaining about today, you know. And this was Tomino in the late '80s.
Yeah, and in the original Mobile Suit Gundam, specifically, there's a scene with Sayla, who is Char's younger sister, and
where she's naked in the
she's
bath.
in the shower,
Yep.
And that was supposed to just be, you know, classic cinematic moment of characterization for her introspection, but you had people snapping pictures of that scene in the theaters, shocking Tomino with that behavior.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, like, I think it's funny to me to think of like Lin Minmay from Macross as like an early example of like constructing that moe on purpose, because of the fact that I believe she has an entourage of 3 characters who follow her around, and their names are Bokuha, Roriko, Nda. Those are the 3 characters. I am a lolicon is what that translates to in English. So yeah, it's that whole idea of like lolly and worshiping these idols has always been kind of integral to anime. So yeah, I don't think that we're in like a moe age now. It's just like an art style shift, and I don't even think the art style shift, like, I don't think what they were going for is any different from like the works of Haruhiko Mikimoto as a character designer, or Kenichi Sonoda, who were both very popular designers, you know, in the late 80s, early 90s. Sonoda did Lachlan, your fucking avatar. What's Otaku no Video,
Right.
and Gunsmith Cats, and he didn't do Gunbuster, but he did another one.
Mikimoto
from
was Gunbuster.
Yeah, Mikimoto did Gunbuster, Macross, and these guys are like Mikimoto's still around drawing what's her name from
Mume, one of the most
Mume, like the
endearing-
hottest,
yeah,
like the most moe character of last year is drawn by this
retro
guy who's
character designer.
yeah, exactly. And I don't think they were ever going for something particularly different. The goal was always, let's draw a really cute girl. And I just think that when we got into this digital age of animation, like, the way that you can do that changed, you know, like, I think it's almost more of a change in technologies than a change in intentions. Like, I look at a show, I'm just looking around my room as I tend to do when I'm looking for examples, like Gakko Gurashi, where you've got like the super thin girls with like gradient hair colors and stuff like that, and I really think that that's just a lot easier to draw with digital animation than it would have been back in the day. Like, it's easier to create these pencil thin outlines and these gradient hairs and stuff like that you just couldn't quite do with pen and paper animation. And it's like the technology is now allowing us to draw characters like this, not so much that we wouldn't have 30 years ago, you know.
Yeah, I mean, certainly digital coloring over something like cell animation will have that softer look to it.
Yeah. So I mean, if you look at the early 2000s and the early digital animation stuff, like, I think a lot of the character design from that era, which is kind of where this supposed moe style like comes from, like when people start complaining about there being too much moe, it like begins in that late 90s early 2000s era. And I think a lot of it was just like this awkward transition of how do we make these characters look good in digital animation.
You can
know?
definitely see them grappling with how they can translate cuteness to this new animation technology, with how hideous a lot of the designs are. Even like the key adaptations from the early 2000s get a lot of flack.
Yeah, the 2002 version of canon where the mouths are like fucking jettisoned up into their eyeballs and stuff, and that's where the Ugu Am I Kawaii screenshot comes from, though I think that's doctored. But yeah, I'm sure everybody knows this meme I'm referring to. I don't know, is this meme too old? Is the Ugu Am I Kawaii meme too old?
I know that one, at least.
But yeah, I think that like moe was always kind of the same. It's just that the word came into existence at a point. you know, like when this was reaching a fever pitch. Like I don't think the feeling of moe is any different from what people felt towards minmay in the 80s, but they gave it a name in the 90s, you know, and then people ran with that name so far that it feels like it became weird and diluted, and now no one uses it that way anymore. That's just how it seems to me. I don't know if it's like this in Japan, and that's kind of why I wanted to talk to you guys. Like, how long ago was the Moe Manifesto published, and do you think that the word is still used that way? Like, that people still describe themselves as feeling moe towards things today in Japan?
I think Moe Manifesto was 2010. Joe, you probably know better than I.
It's about 2011, 2012. It's definitely sort of in the aughts, but it's sort of a weird text because it's been compiled over a series of years.
Right.
So some are newer than others.
Someone noted on the Reddit that if you look at Japanese Google searches, moe has dropped off in recent years.
Yeah.
It's searched up far less often.
I mean, I don't hear it mentioned in anime the way I used to, in otaku-oriented. Like, I really think that, like, with anime, I mean, even being mentioned in a show, you're already a couple years behind the times. Because, like, you know, people, I think creatives tend to always be, like, a few years behind on what's really going on. Just because you start making stuff and you get pulled farther away from the culture that you're making reference to, and it takes time to get your thing published, you know? Like, Steins Gate, by the time it was an anime, some of that 2-channel lingo in the show was probably dated. Mm-hmm. Like, after having been originally in a visual novel and then adapted, the script was probably written a year before the anime got made, you know? It's like, by then, are people still using this slang? And so by the time, like, Lucky Star came out, I think moe was probably, like, already kind of an older term, but one that was still in use, you know, but like the show's kind of making fun of it as like this cultural event that just happened. And then you see it in anime here and there. You see Travis Touchdown saying it around the same time in No More Heroes. You see characters, you know, talking about moe, and then it kind of falls off. And now we've got, like, everyone's making reference to Chunibyo, and everyone's making reference to, like, you know, we're now parodying isekai because that became such a big thing that blew up, you know, and it's like, I don't see moe getting talked about in anime, in anime culture. I really just see moe these days as people describing an art style they don't like. And I have to wonder, is the term as it was originally understood kept alive at all? Like, is anybody still saying, oh man, that character's so moe, I feel a moe for her, you know?
Oh yeah, it still remains a lot in sort of object affection. If you look at, for instance, the train otaku, for instance, will oftentimes use moe because there's really not much of a better
in reference to trains.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that's the other thing, because I think I mentioned this in my my ranting vlog about the subject, and I thought about it more after I posted it, that the idea that moe was always a meme. Like, when people talk about it online, like, I don't think moe was used as much in, like, a I'm reviewing this show kind of way. Like, man, this episode was really good. She was so moe, and that's why it was a good episode. It's more like when people say Megumin was best girl this episode. Like, that's kind of how I think moe is more used, that kind of mimetic sense. And, oh my god, I lost track of where I was going with that point. Do you know what I mean, though?
Can you repeat
there
that?
was always some level of tongue-in-cheek irony, or not?
Yeah,
at least in
and
as
so
we got into
like
the
over
2000s.
time, I think moe came, like, maybe in the beginning people were mostly saying, like, this girl is moe, or she just did a moe thing, and then eventually it becomes like Kaiji is moe. Kaiki is the most moe character in Bakemonogatari, you know. This train is moe. Man, this drink I just had sure was moe, you know. Like, it becomes like a transformative meme in the way that memes do, and you know, kind of escapes into just becoming like a weird catch-all word for, like, a certain emotion, as opposed to something you ascribe to a character.
Well, I think you do train otaku maybe a bit of a disservice there, because what they're getting at is
characters.
the sort of the intangible character of the train, right? Like specific trains, maybe it's got a weaker engine, but
I guess I forgot that trains are like, yeah, trains kind of can be characters because they're all individual.
Right.
Like, to my mind, a train is a train, you know, but I'm sure to a train otaku that would have them shaking their fist.
There can be a train that is sort of like hard-working, even as strange as it seems to describe that, and that's sort of where you get the anthropomorphizing of appliances or battleships or whatever into anime girls. The reason they can give them personalities is because those objects have some level of inherent personality, and that's the moe of those things.
Here's a question that I don't know if either of you is able to answer, and I know I can't. Are idol shows the same thing as moe? Like, is what idol fans feel towards idols moe, or is it just like a totally different thing? Because I don't understand idol shit at all. Has there been research done on idols, like, specifically as like its own phenomenon? I mean idol anime, like Love Live and Idol Master, not like real life idols.
Oh, idol anime. I don't watch a lot of idol shows, so I can't really provide much insight on that.
Joe, do you actually do academic research yourself? Because if so, I propose idol anime. Get in there. I need to know.
You want me to change my doctoral dissertation to idols?
What is it right now?
I'm researching how democratic media portray authoritarian institutions. So in the context of Japan, how Japan reframes its imperialistic Japanese hyper-nationalistic history in a democratic media environment.
So you watching a lot of Gate and stuff like that?
Well, I mean, I've watched a lot of Gate and get angry at it, but yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, but you should do idols.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind. I'll pitch it to my supervisor and see what he thinks.
I say this simply because idol anime, I follow certain people who are into it, and it's very much like its own subculture. Like it's almost distant from the rest of anime, kind of in the same way that maybe like Toho or Kankole is, except that it's not even engaged the same way as other anime. Like, there's so much of the eventer stuff and like purchasing just unbelievably massive amounts of shit, which I guess is an otaku thing in general, but like there's this anime blogger I've been following for like 10 years called Omoikane, and like back in the day he was just an anime blogger, but in the last 4 years he turned into an idol guy and eventer. And I mean, granted, his writing style is pretty obtuse in the first place, but I literally don't understand anything he says anymore. Like, he makes posts about idol stuff, and it just blows my mind. And I'm like, what is this culture surrounding Love Live and Idol Master? And is it moe, or is it just a totally other thing that's sprung up that has nothing to do with it?
We need Kentaro Miura to write an autobiographical manga just explaining the appeal.
I don't know if he's into Love Live, but I would be interested to know.
In regards to idols, I haven't read any of his work on idols, but if I'm recalling correctly, Miyadai Shinji has written about idols because he focuses a lot on Japanese subcultures. So if you're interested in looking at idols, that would definitely be the direction I would recommend.
So what do you guys think is, if you want to talk about moe anime, do you think there should be some kind of like prerequisite of understanding or explaining yourself? Like, if I throw out the word moe, I don't feel like anybody understands what I mean at this point.
I do feel like if you're a content creator, if you're writing for an audience, moe is not going to be the best term to use in almost any situation, just because there's so many different understandings of it. You'll be better served by like cute girls anime if that's what you're going for, or like a character being endearing if that's what you're talking about.
I mean, I do think there's a context where using moe is appropriate, that and some people called me out on the fact when I was making this rant about how I want the term moe to just go away. People were like, didn't you just make a video called Moe Will Mobilize You in Log Horizon? And I was like, yes, But what's the reason that I feel the need to use the term moe in that situation is because that show is commenting on moe. Like it's deliberately having a character, like they create moe out of her. They try to make her a moe girl and sell her to an otaku crowd. And I think that there's a lot of shows that do like that are playing into moe culture, not just as like, hey, this is a show that's trying to make you feel moe, but like the Monogatari series, where there's this whole important distinction between whether Senjo Gahara is a moe girl or fascination. You know, like they come up with, Araragi says, you know, moe is kind of out of style, but I have a fascination with you, and I hope that term becomes popular, you know.
Right.
Or Haruhi, which makes reference to moe all the time, you know, and like both of those were around the time that this was really relevant. 2006 is when those, you know, came out and were really like riding the moe term hype wave. And like when you're looking back at that era, I do think that it is sometimes important to bring up what moe was, you know, like maybe not even if it doesn't exist anymore, it was a thing and some shows were trying to talk about it. But like outside that context, to just like be talking about a show and say like, you know, I usually don't like moe shows, but this one was pretty all right. And it's just like, what are you talking about? Just leave that on the cutting room floor, please. You know.
Well, it's really interesting now because when when we're talking about moe in that context, it sort of has become sort of a metonym in that it's now essentially becoming this stand-in for something that's incredibly vast. Because now the question becomes, you know, oh, this is a moe show. Well, what essentializes that for it to be a moe show? And, you know, most of the time, I think, is people are, when they're referring to moe, they're referring to nichijoke shows, which are, you know, cute girls.
Everyday life.
Yeah, cute girls doing cute things, everyday types. But I mean, like, does that necessarily have to include that?
Like, do you mean to say, do those shows necessarily have to be moe or vice versa? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, it sort of gets at some really fundamental questions as to, like, can you create a moe show that doesn't cohere to the nichijoke
I would
idea?
say absolutely. And that's exactly where I think the confusion comes from, is that that like High School Fleet or Saki or something are definitely moe and definitely not nichijoke. You know, like they're shows that are they're like, High School Fleet's an action show. You know, it's a show, it's structured like an action show, it's paced like one, but the atmosphere is definitely going for that moe sensation. And Saki is like, you know, is very much this, it's a bunch of cute girls, there's the Yuri undertones, there's the light and fluffy feeling, but it's a competitive sports manga. You know, I mean, it's about mahjong, which I don't know if you call it a sport, but it's the pace and structure is that of a sports manga, you know? And so that's where I think this misunderstanding is coming from when someone looks at a moe show and then says, all moe shows are the same, or you just like a lot of moe. And I'm like, well, moe is not a genre in my mind. It's a feeling that certain shows are trying to evoke, but they're not doing it by way of structure of the show. They're doing it by way of this odd combination of art style and characterization and even acting, you know? I think it's really fascinating that there was, what was it? I think in Hibike Euphonium,
Right.
I believe there was a quote where they said they told the actors to deliberately tune down the moe, or to tune down the cuteness of their dialogue, and act more naturalistic, because yeah, moe sounds a certain way, you know?
Even when Hibike, like, from the aesthetic alone, is ostensibly what would fall under a moe series.
Yeah, and I don't think, like, especially as of season 2, I really can't call it a moe show. Like, and that's why I think it's so dangerous to try to conflate the art style with moe itself, because I do think there's shows that are using this cute girls art style and are not trying to evoke that same feeling that those other works were, you know? Even if we look at, let's say, going back to when I was comparing to the olden days and like Macross or Gundam, where there's certain characters that you feel like were supposed to be moe, were supposed to evoke those feelings, and then you look at something like Gunsmith Cats, where the art style is very much like it's definitely, this is the evolution towards moe. You know, these really cutesy lolly girls, but they don't act moe. They're all like hard asses. You know, Minnie May is like a cute little lolly girl, but she's also like a former prostitute, and she like fucks guys all the time, and that's not moe. You know, like that's just not the way it would be. But then you have shows like Girlish Number, which like is sort of maybe a little moe, but the girls are all really cynical and they're assholes and they get drunk, and you know, granted none of them has a sex life. To me, that like having a sex life precludes something from being moe. I think like any acknowledgement that these girls would ever have sex is like, this is no longer moe, even though there's shows with the same art style doing that. You know, and that's the risk I think we run when we look at a show like Hibike Euphonium and say it's moe because of the art style. And I'm like, I don't really get the sense it's going for that. And maybe the first season had a little more of it when it looked like a 4-girls show for a little while, which is I don't know if that's a academic term or anything, but it's a term I made up for shows about 4 girls, like a K-On! Or a Hidamari Sketch. And like Hibike Euphonium kind of wears the costume of one, and it's like OP, and in its first few episodes, and then that pretense is just totally gone by the time you're halfway through the show, and it's entirely gone by season 2. And I really have to think, who would consider this moe, you know?
I think you get at a key point when you bring up anime like Gunsmith Cats and Girlish Number, because the cynicism of something like Girlish Number isn't traditionally moe, but there's a moe to that cynicism specifically because it sort of breaks a mold. It's endearingly novel, and that gets at moe as this subjective experience of just being endeared to a character.
That's an interesting way of putting it. I guess I guess you could say that what I have for Chitose is a sort of moe because I want a cynical older character so
right.
badly, you know,
you
like
identify with that cynicism.
It's moe for people who are sick of moe, or moe for people who used to be into moe, but now we're just too old to take it anymore.
Well, that sort of gets into sort of like there's an additional question in that, Lachlan, which is, so Digi, if you met her in real life, and that was her behavior, would you still feel that sort of attraction to her?
If she was as beautiful as she is in the show, then yes.
Okay, fair enough.
But yeah, that is really interesting, the delineation of 2D and 3D spaces, and what types of attraction are limited.
There was a lot of debate back in the late 2000s on whether it was whether moe could exist in the 3D space, which there's a classic, I don't remember what anime had it, but there's a character who screams like moe can't exist in 3D in a show. And then also whether or not it's massively insulting to refer to a 3D woman as moe, because to a lot of people moe inherently means like something vapid or two-dimensional or like pandering to otaku, and so to describe a real-life person as moe flies in the face of that. But I think if you're looking at moe as a feeling, and especially I think it can easily be felt towards a persona, like maybe
right.
not like
it's towards
plenty
a character.
Yeah, I mean like an idol. When you look at an idol on stage, that is not a person, that's a persona they're playing. Or like if you look at, let's say, YouTuber Endless Jess, you know, like you're not seeing the person, you're seeing the character that he portrays on screen. I didn't use myself as an example because I am basically the exact same person on video and off. But like, yeah, you know, you can feel moe towards that persona because it is a character in the same sense that a two-dimensional character is, I think. So I do think moe could exist in 3D, but maybe not towards an actual human.
You actually get a really important point here, which is that the feelings of moe being separated from sort of the physical object in which that moe surrounds, because, you know, that's the entire idea of sort of both referenced in the Moe Manifesto, the idea of the maid, as well as the idea of the little sister. You know, the concept that if you have a little sister, you're probably not a real little sister. You're probably not going to really enjoy that company in a moe lens.
Right.
And this is sort of a byproduct of how sexuality is really understood as a result of Saito Tamaki's work in Beautiful Fighting Girl, which is that the otaku, and this is the lens that you're using here, this is a very otaku lens, which is that there is a separation between sort of a real world sexuality versus a virtual sexuality.
Yeah.
And
I think that distinction is very important.
It's incredibly important.
Speaking as a world-class lolicon, it's extremely important. Yeah, I mean, I also, while I'm not academically read on these subjects, I used to write a lot about otaku sexuality and stuff like that, where I do think you're more, it's like being attracted to a trope or a concept as opposed to like an actual thing. You know, like the little sister. A little sister who you're in love with is just like not even in the realm of reality. It's just an idea, and the idea, I don't even think it's really tied to like being a sister. It's more like what that represents, like the idea of someone who's been next to you your whole life and you have a deeper connection with, who looks up to you, like, you know. Like, I totally get that. I would probably, if I had a sister, I would probably just hate her or something. You know, we'd probably have, or just, you've seen, like, when you see a real person that you've, like, grown up with, like, you know, there's a whole different feeling. It's like being in love with your mom. Like, I've always known my mom. How could I find her attractive? I've seen her since I was a baby, you know? Like, a real sister is nothing like this weird concept that it is in anime porn, you know.
Sure.
So if anyone else wants to say anything more on the subject, did I just like creep everybody out so badly that nobody could say anything? If anyone else wants to say anything more about moe, we can move on to another term here.
Yeah, what's next on your list?
I didn't prepare.
Oh, okay. Well, here's a question. What do you guys think about the term otaku as it's understood today? Because the reason why I want to mention this, because Daisuke Watanabe actually wrote a really interesting article about Kimi no Nawa, Makoto Shinkai's latest film. And he essentially makes the argument that the idea of the otaku is dead. The otaku are over.
I remember hearing about this from that. I really think that ascribing, like, the idea of the otaku being dead is an entertaining idea, but the idea that Kimi no Nawa represents that, I just find, like, putting too much power in the hands of that film, just because it happens to be a really popular and successful film. Like, I mean, had Wolf Children been as successful, would we have been saying it about that movie? Or is there something particular about Kimi no Nawa that, like, this is the one that says otaku are dead?
So,
yeah, I think when making that determination, you have to look at whether or not there were just elements of Kimi no Nawa that had a super mainstream appeal versus there being elements in it that will affect the way people perceive anime in some way that will have an effect moving forward.
Are you guys familiar with Kimi no Nawa's relationship to Fukushima?
To a degree, yes.
Not much.
Okay. Well, did you know what Fukushima is, though, right?
The nuclear meltdown that happened, yeah.
Yeah, the tsunami and the nuclear meltdown. So, essentially, and you know, Shinkai has mentioned this as well, but Kimi no Nawa was intended to be this film that sort of understands the idea of an everyday life after Fukushima. And the reason why this is incredibly important when we're talking about the idea of otaku is because the term otaku has always been predicated on the idea of an abundance of the everyday. There is a particular quote by Kentaro Takekuma, who he says that the ultimate symbol the ultimate symbol of the otaku is the convenience store, because it's open 24/7. You can get everything you need from it. You can do everything you need from it.
Totally agreed.
That is the ultimate otaku symbol. It signifies the affluent Japanese life that is needed to live the otaku lifestyle. Well, after the events of Fukushima, one of the things they mentioned was that one of the things they said, and it's a very sort of symbolic gesture, which is the convenience store is closed. The convenience store, the lights are out in the convenience store.
Let's see.
And so when we're talking about the idea of the otaku is dead, we're talking about that constant affluence. When they say the otaku is dead, they're saying that to live an affluent everyday lifestyle is completely gone. And therefore the otaku have to change in some way in which they may no longer be considered sort of quote-unquote classical otaku.
I mean, I find it kind of absurd to suggest that because of that one event, all affluent lifestyle is gone. You know, like, be it in Japan or otherwise. I mean, if that's what defines an otaku, then I am most definitely the world's still being here otaku. I have not changed. I'm sitting in a room entirely covered in anime posters, and the convenience store is my life. I've got one near my house that I go, I'm up all night. Right now I'm chugging energy drinks because I'm trying to get back to being up all night because I've been up during the day and it's driving me crazy. Like, I identify so much with the idea of the otaku, and I've said before, the reason I'm willing to label myself that, even though I hate labels, because I think they can take on so many definitions, kind of like what happened with moe, that it just means so much to so many people that at some point it becomes difficult to even talk about. But the reason I'm willing to use the word otaku to describe myself is there is no part of the definition that I don't think describes me. Like, whatever connotation it has, that you're creepy, that you spend too much time at the convenience store, never leave your room, socially awkward, obsessive, unclean, badly dressed, all of it. There's nothing you could say about otaku that wouldn't describe me. And so I think, like, as long as people like me are around, you can't say otaku's dead. It might have moved. Maybe it's not where it originally was. But, like, the convenience store may have been closed in Fukushima, but it was probably open in Tokyo. So, the otaku are still there. Some otaku are dead, maybe,
Wow, that's weirdly dark. Well, I mean, so I think you're taking this a little literally.
Yeah, I tend to do something like that.
The idea is simply that, the understanding of the otaku, and this is actually really important when you consider that the people who are saying the otaku is dead, the age of the otaku is over, these people are Azuma Hiroki, they are Toshio Okada, there are
right.
Kaiichiro Morikawa. They are they come from a very specific time, and they have a very, very specific idea of the otaku.
That's what gets to me about it is, like, whenever Toshio Okada comments on otaku, I have to wonder, is that guy still an otaku? Like, is it that his construct of it is dying, or is the term evolving? Does it mean something different from what it meant when he was into it, and, like, therefore maybe his idea of the otaku is dead, but some other idea lives on? I'm not sure, but, like, maybe this is just from where I'm standing, but, like, I feel like the way I'm acting now is the same way otaku acted then, and I don't know if the meaning has changed too much. I mean, I'm still sitting here watching Otaku no Video and thinking that's about me, and right. He wrote the damn thing, so I don't know.
Well, there's a lot of sort of change. There's a lot of change now in that there's this growth. Well, I don't know. I'm really uneasy about saying growth because that assumes that there's this sort of zero state, but
right.
Wow, you know what? I'll just say it. So there's this growth of this other identity, which are often called denpa, the airheads. Which is why when you look at a show like, Denpa Kyoshi, we might look at it and say, why is this person not an otaku?
What is Denpa Kyoshi about? I have not watched it. I have not heard this denpa term, so I would.
They essentially just mean airheads. They're people who are somewhat disconnected. Are you watching Chaos Child, or have you watched Chaos Head?
I've seen the first episode of Chaos Head.
That's sort of a little bit more of an extreme rendition of the Denpa. When we're talking about the idea that the otaku age is over, or the otaku are dead, as dramatic as that claim is, there is sort of a new lineage that is emerging in studies when we're seeing it.
So is the Denpa the new lineage?
I don't know. I haven't really read that much up on Denpa. Most of it's in Japanese.
That's the hardest thing about this entire job that all of us are trying to do here, is that most of it's in Japanese, and we are all too lazy to learn it. Or you're probably too busy. I'm too lazy.
I'm trying to learn it, but there's a difference. There's a difference between like knowing very basic, very basic Japanese and learning it, and then just trying to read like a 300-page book written by a Japanese academic. It's nonsense.
I've been, air quotes, trying to learn it for about 11 years now. And I've made very little progress since high school, which I am disturbed by how long I've been out of. Yeah, it is difficult. But that's kind of why, that's a big part of why I think all these terms and stuff get so confusing, is that there is this disconnect between the Western and Japanese anime fandoms. And again, because I think, as I described much earlier in this, that there's like a sort of subset of the Western anime fandom that's like sitting closer to the Japanese one. And it's kind of like, what's it called? Alpha consumers? Is that the word for people who like are the first adapters of new technology? Like the people who had Blu-rays before anyone else. That's the kind of thing I'm referring to. Like, there's this sort of alpha consumer otaku who's like, following the trends in Japan, talking on 2channel and bringing information back. The guys who can read both languages and are indoctrinating all of us with these terms. And then there's such a huge ocean between those people and like guy who just saw Sword Art Online on Adult Swim and started posting on anime forums, and yet they're all on the same forum. They're all on YouTube. They're all watching my videos, and like I'm trying to account for what does moe mean to 10 years anime fan who watches stuff raw, and what does it mean to guy who just came from Adult Swim, and like that huge ocean of dissonance, I think, is where like why all these terms are so confusing, and why like we kind of need some level of like catching people up, or else we have to sort of somewhere along the line you gotta like cut the rope and abandon a term like moe, where like I can't possibly explain it in every single video that I make. I'd rather just try not to use it, so I feel like I've gotten us off topic, or maybe we all did. I've been chugging energy drinks this whole time, and I'm just like all over the place. But I want to get back to that whole death of otaku thing, and especially revolving around Kimi no Na wa, because I do find it interesting to think about the idea that like that otaku could be dying because like, or that anime is so mainstream now, and that maybe the connection between otaku and the mainstream is going stronger, that like I really think there was a time when otaku was, just a hardline insult, where it meant like you're creepy, and like the people who were using it in like in the otaku no video sense of like a badge of honor were like proudly saying, I am not a part of the mainstream. I am just like, I am my own guy. I'm totally fuck society, is like kind of what it meant to call yourself an otaku at a time. And in the same way that like calling yourself a nerd is not even an insult anymore, nor really does it mean anything anymore, I think with otaku, like there's sort of a bridge between guys like me and the mainstream where they get where I'm coming from, and it's not so weird to be one. Do you think that in any way like kills what an otaku is, or does it just change it? Or does it mean something different if like normal people like have heard of a guy like me?
I think that when it goes from counterculture to a regular, unsurprising piece of just a greater culture that's been demystified, at the very least, its meaning changes fundamentally, if you don't want to say it's died entirely as an identity.
Right, because, like, I mean, it's not like it's just normal. Like, no one would come into my room and look around and say, this is fine. You know, like, it's still like an identifiable classification of person, but I don't think it's the same thing as, like, you don't even belong in society. It's like, this is just a social group, kind of. Mm-hmm. Like, maybe, whereas otaku used to mean, like, I am outright rejected by the society surrounding me. Now it more means, like, I'm just a different kind of person, but everyone knows what that person is. Like, everyone knows what an otaku is. It's not, people aren't going around suspecting us all of being serial killers. Right. They're still suspecting us all of being pedophiles, but, so the battle's not completely over, but...
It hasn't been entirely normalized yet,
yeah.
Which is, I think, the path it's on.
Well, God, I hope so. I hope we're on the path to that, but it's always hard to say, because who knows which way the tide will swing in the cultural battle,
I think a term that's interesting to bring up if we want to move the focus back towards Western fandom is Sakuga, because I think that's one that
is an interesting one. In
many ways has sort of worked out, at least so far. Like, everyone generally understands what you're getting at, and there's not too many issues with it.
How is... Because I know that Sakuga, in terms of actual animation, does not mean the same thing as great animation. Like, Sakuga just means drawings, right?
Yeah,
right.
It just means drawing picture.
But do the Japanese fandom not also refer to, like, expressive animation as Sakuga?
So I haven't come across any research material that essentially says that there is this community of people who say this is Sakuga outside of a community that already knows what Sakuga is, if that makes any sense.
Right.
It's still very much a closed term. That said, the practice of looking at very specific cuts, knowing who makes them, knowing how they play with each other across different texts, that has been a product in sort of in otaku since the late 80s, early 90s.
Right. I mean, you can even see in, like, Blue Blazes, the show about the whole history of Gainax, like, there's multiple scenes of the main characters, like Hideaki Anno watching Mazinger and, like, fangasming over a specific animation cut by Kaneda or something, and being like, oh, this, you can tell it's a Kaneda cut because of this and this, and it's like, yeah, this is the exact same thing.
Right.
It's still going on.
The reason it took on the implication of being high-quality animation is mostly just that a Sakuga fan, an animation fan, is someone who's going to primarily be fangasming over those impressive pieces of animation.
Which it even seems like the Sakuga community in the West is trying to get away from that, it seems like. Like, if you go on Sakuga Boru now, it's not just the most impressive shots. It's like anything that they have a name. Like, any shot that they know who the animator is up there. It's not always something that's, like, gonna blow your mind to shit. Like, sometimes it's just... Yeah, this is just a piece of Sakuga, which just means a piece of drawings. I'm just wondering, do they call it that in Japan? Because I thought Sakuga Wiki was Japanese run.
Like, I've seen it on 2chan, so I'm pretty sure they do. But I just haven't seen any research material that looks at it as Sakuga. I've seen them talk about it, right, but I've never actually seen research material as Sakuga. But of course, did you have a large enough sub base that I'm pretty sure someone in the comments will say, well, this person has. Yeah. So possibly.
Yeah, I just, the first introduction I had to the word was in, like, probably 2009 or 10, where there was a blog who had translated a large part of Sakuga Wiki, which was just, like an entirely in Japanese wiki about animators. And there was, like, a list of like what they considered Sakuga shows, like, you know, shows that had a lot of exemplary animation or films with that, and it was just a huge list of it, which I have bookmarked just because I intended to watch all of them at some point. And so that was my first introduction to the term, was like straight from Japan, so I just kind of assumed that they were also calling it that, and then we just kind of adopted it. But it seems like some people, I guess because of the fact that in animation terms it doesn't mean nice animation, then some people think, well, then that means we're using it wrong. But it seems like it's universal that this is a slang for good animation.
Yeah, and even Sakugaboru, I believe, from what I've seen, they moderate and they have some level of quality standards. So a clip that isn't too impressive, you'll have some people in the comments, oh, you know, I wonder if this will get taken down, and someone will point out, well, no, the way her hair flutters in the wind at this point is kind of
so there is debate over the quality standards.
Yeah,
that's kind of funny.
And then if it's by an animator who's noteworthy, even if it isn't particularly impressive, it's just relevant on account of that. But I think Sakuga has made its way into the West without too many issues, just because of the simplicity of it. You can just say great animation, Sakuga, and then move on, and everyone kind of gets what you're talking about. I mean, even Giguk, right? Just throw a Yutaka Nakamura clip on screen, he'll bring it up, and then people will understand what he's saying.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to me, like, I love that Sakuga's becoming a thing because it gives us a way to point at good animation and, like, call it something other than good animation, because of the fact that I think when you say this show has great animation, people are just thinking you mean it's a good-looking show.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have that extra weight of, like, I am specifically referring to the drawings in this clip. You know, I'm referring to the way that the animator moved the character here with these drawings, not just the overall, the show has good... It's kind of like when people say, this anime has good graphics. Like, you know, it's...
Decades of... poorly informed discussion about anime, of mediocre reviews of anime, have kind of polluted the term good animation and taken away any meaning it could have, and Sakuga gives us that.
Yeah. And that's why I'm always hesitant with all these terms, because on the one hand, there's like, I want to be more accessible and like kind of guide people in, and there's some words that I feel like we don't need to say it to get the point across. And so that's why, like, I recently had this video called There's No Reason to Say Hentai, because hentai is such a kind of, I mean, everyone kind of understands what it means. Like, most people, if you've heard of hentai, you know it as anime porn. Like, if you're in the West, you know that's what it is. Probably most Japanese people, if they heard an American say it, would know that's what we were talking about. But it's also, like, in Japan more referred to as, like, ero. And so it's like, why don't we adopt that? Or why don't we, like, why even have this term that's confusing when we could just say porn and everyone gets it? Where, like, I don't think there's any specific advantage we get from referring to anime as hentai as opposed to as anime porn. And I mean, that one's not even a big deal because most people get it. And I don't think it's hard to explain. You just say hentai is anime porn, you know, but I do have to wonder with these terms, like, where is the cutoff point between, like, worth explaining and not worth explaining?
Right.
Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Like isekai, where people are treating isekai now as, like, it's a word that's really, I know it's been around for a long time, but it's really coming into prominence in the last couple years. I know Pause and Select, Joe, you've made some videos about... You've used the term isekai kind of extensively, haven't you?
I've actually only said isekai once.
Really?
And that was in a video about Sekaikai.
Oh, well, that's a whole, I don't even know what that one means. What does that one mean?
World types. Have you seen my Evangelion video?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I've seen kind of a random scattering of your videos.
Okay.
But I've seen the term isekai coming into prominence a lot with ReZero, because of the fact that a lot of people are saying that show is playing around with the tropes of isekai, and Konosuba, both of which seem to be pointed at sort of subverting some of those tropes and stuff like that. But then it immediately becomes weird and contentious when now people are saying, yeah, it's a subversion of isekai, like Sword Art Online. And then I go, well, hold on, is that an isekai show? Because they're going to a virtual world. It's not teleported to another world show. There's not a different culture there. It's just human culture. Is Log Horizon an isekai show? Like, maybe, but like the system is kind of built around human needs. Like, they're going to a video game that they all understood and that was like created by people as opposed to a literal alien world. And now I'm just wondering, like, isn't it easier to not even say this word, because it's gonna end up conflating a bunch of shit, and like, are people going to understand it without me having to explain what I mean when I say isekai? Or is it worth existing, you know?
Well, the thing about sort of removing the term isekai is that it runs into the exact same problem anyway, even if you just say going to another world, because the debate over whether Sword Art Online is an isekai show really boils down to the authenticity of the world in which they're going to. And so, you know, Sword Art Online, you know, Alfheim or whatever all the other worlds are, they're not, quote unquote, real worlds, so to say. You know, they're virtual constructions. But they behave in a way, and for the sake of the narrative, that it has very real world effects. And so someone might argue, for instance, that a VMMORPG world might be an isekai show because you're going to another world. It just simply is constructed in sort of a different way. And
right.
And if we remove the word isekai, it's the exact same problem we have anyways. You know, because
yeah,
then
suppose so.
It's the same fundamental debate that's happening. The reason why I'm going to defend people using the term isekai is because it's sort of trying to capture a broad otherness in the same way that a word like moe or sakuga does. It's sort of like a metonym in that it's referring to something very sort of amorphous, but you know, when you sort
understood.
of get it's very much understood. It's a good shorthand for you to say, well, this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I guess I can see it being helpful in the same way, like what I was describing with that there are shows that are like how Log Horizon is deliberately using moe, and I would also say it's deliberately using, you know, isekai, or like that trope of we're sending people to another world, but it's not just for the sake of the story, it's also a commentary on other stories that do that. And so I can see using isekai in that way, but it just kind of runs into the same problem that moe does of, you know, when is it interesting to use this term, and when are we just blanketing shows into it so that we can say it's just another isekai show, which is a term I see bandied around on 4chan a lot. Is like, oh, it's just another isekai, and it's like, that's where I think we're getting into using these terms in an uninteresting and unhelpful way, you know?
I think one of the things we have to remember when we're using terms like these is that they're very much laden in social expectations. When we say isekai, the reason why they go to another world is to escape their previous world. And so the moment when you use a term like isekai, there is a sort of very sort of broad floating marker that exists with that word that implies something about it that's important, which is why I have such a fascination with a term like sekaike, because sekaike is so heavily ingrained in sort of these broad floating markers that imply that whenever something is sekaike, or whenever it feels like sekaike, it's bringing in a baggage, because that's how language works. You know, words have a baggage in specific contexts. My concern is that when you remove the word isekai and then you say, you know, traveling to another world or sent to another world and so on and so forth, it removes a little bit of that baggage. It removes a little bit of that context. And so the problem here is that we don't really know what's being removed.
Right.
You know, sort of like moe. You know.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you, and this is something I'm concerned about a lot, and it's sort of a different ideology you and I have taken on our channels a lot, is that you tend to go for those very specific things and to like kind of use the term that has the loaded meaning, and then continue. And for me, it's difficult to use that word without then having to explain it, because I'm always kind of trying to get my audience up to speed, because so much of it, as I described earlier, that there's that huge ocean of difference between guy who's been watching anime for 10 years and watches it raw, and then guy who just came from Adult Swim, and both of them are equally likely to be watching my videos. And when I use a loaded word like isekai, I feel like I have to now unpack the whole thing. I have to give the whole history of this word. And so if you use it in a video and you're thinking, fuck the members of my audience who don't already know what this means, then, like, not to say that you're saying that, but, like, if you're saying, like, I'm going to use this word and hopefully my audience all gets it, then it's just a different set of expectations from, I don't expect my audience to know what this word means and I don't have time to explain it. So let's not open the can of worms that comes from using it and inviting this whole other world of discussion, which is why I find a lot of academic writing to be kind of impenetrable, because a lot of the times in a casual sentence, there's a word that you need to read another book to understand, and it's like you have to keep going down this rabbit hole of another word that has a year's worth of research to unpack behind it. And so at some point you're writing to an audience who has to have read all that to get where you're coming from,
Yeah, that's a totally fair concern. Yeah. I think the main trouble, or at least from what I'm seeing and from my perspective, the main trouble that a lot of folks had with your videos on your After Dark channel was that you didn't, or as far as we could tell, you didn't carefully distinguish between this is when I'm using it, this is how I'm going to be framing my argument, versus this is how it should be.
Yeah, I will say that those After Dark videos are all unhinged drunken rants that that are not meant to be calls to action, which I think is a problem that is my fault. I don't distinguish very well between here's a thought I had while laying in bed at 3 a.m. and here's what I want everyone to do in their writing from now on. And I totally get why people were like, don't you use these terms all the time yourself? And I'm like, yeah, it's a thought experiment. It's not, like, I'm willing to be very hypocritical in my videos. It doesn't bother me to blatantly say a word that I just said should die because I felt like it in the moment I said it. But I do have to, like, with all my videos, there's this range of specificity where, and I know how it feels to be on the outside, because that blogger I mentioned before, Omoe Kane, his writing is so steeped in the language of, like, 2channel and idol fandom and just, like, all these terms that he doesn't explain. He just rattles them off, like all these inventor terms that I will read his writing and I try to parse it based on context clues, but sometimes it's just too much for me. And it's just like he's writing to a culture that I'm just not a part of, and therefore I don't understand that culture. And every time I read his posts, I'm just like, I don't get this idol thing, And I'm always concerned that people are going to watch one of my videos and go, I don't get this this otaku thing. Like, what the hell is this guy talking about, And I have felt that way sometimes watching a pause and select video. Like, I've had those moments of, like, I just legitimately don't get it. Like, I don't know what you're talking about because I haven't read any of these books that you're referencing,
Well, I do have a book club.
That's true.
And I have invited you on before.
Oh.
The problem is I'd have to read.
Yeah.
God damn it.
I can't read books with no pictures in them. I just spent $100 on manga today. I have to get through all that. Well, I'm someone who very much prefers to do my learning through, like, I like to talk about anime and manga like what I got out of it individually. Like, to me, studying anime is about watching anime. And I totally get having, like, more of a like more of an academic perspective, and I think it's interesting. I'm very glad that pause and select exists because it means it's something I don't have to do. Which I'm always, my favorite YouTube channels are anything that fulfills a niche that I would otherwise have to fulfill, and if I don't have to, I'm like, perfect. I never have to worry about writing like academically about anime. Someone's doing it. If anyone wants that, they can go watch your channel. You know. Like, sometimes people will tell me, like, why don't you write more academically, like pause and select? I'm like, because he's already there. Go watch him, you know? But yeah, like, for me, it's more like read 1,000 manga and then look at what it's doing to me and talk about that, which is why I call myself a gonzo journalist.
Okay.
But, I don't remember how we got onto that topic at all. Are there any other otaku terms we should discuss? Lachlan, do you have any more that you think are confusing or interesting to talk about?
Well, here's... Oh, please continue. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, well, here's a question. What is your definition of iyashike?
I have always taken it as the sort of the soothing, the way that it's sort of Wikipedia defined, I guess. Like, I see it as these slow kind of plotting shows that are meant to almost take you to a different mind state. You know, like the stuff directed by Junichi Sato, like that he has this very distinctive style of like, this show is so fucking slow, you have to think differently to get into the mood for it. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like if I try to watch a manchu, I can't just watch it the way I would a normal show. And that's kind of the distinction I have with iyashike, is like, you have to approach it differently from how you would approach, say, like Hidamari's Sketch, which is a relaxing and fun, cute show, but it's still by and large a comedy. It's still paced normally. Characters are having dialogue all the time and sharing jokes. Whereas in like an aria or something, or in a manchu, there might be 3 minutes of a character walking around whistling through town and just like pretty shots of gondolas and folk music playing, and like, that's iyashike to me.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very sort of abstract definition of it, which is really interesting.
Well, it's kind of like moe again, where I know it when I see it. And I think luckily iyashike is the kind of term that most people, if they don't understand it, won't use it, because they'll just go, well, I don't know what that is. I'm pretty sure that's just a moe show you're talking about. You know? But I can look at two different shows that are both quote unquote slice of life, and to me there's a kind of clear distinction between which one is a comedy, which one's iyashike. Subsonic Sparkle had a great video about this. Yeah. His 4 different types of slice of life anime, which I thought was pretty on the mark and helpful. Like, there really are just like these different categories that, like, from the outside to people who don't care about the genre, it's all just slice of life cute girls shows. But like, there's definitely a hugely different tone between an iyashike show and like K-On! You know, like K-On! Is trying to be funny and like sweet and have these like dramatic arcs to it, and an iyashike show is just like putting you down in front of a nice picture and saying like, soothe yourself, you know.
Yeah, it's Digi, have you read Motoko Tanaka's work on the imagination of the 2000s?
It's safe to bet I have not read anything.
Okay. You can stop at have you read if it's not fiction.
Well, first off, I think you should definitely read it. It's not dense. It's not a dense work. I'm more than happy to tweet out the link to you. It's publicly available. Essentially, it's really fascinating, sort of the idea of iyashike compared to sort of what we would call nichijoke, because nichijoke has different social markers than iyashike, because arguably one of the main reasons why iyashike became so popular was during the healing boom of the late 90s, which was as a result of the Om Shinrikyo attacks in 1995. And so it's very much sort of a Japanese post 9/11 text.
Yeah, I've seen. There was a great. This wasn't based on any kind of academic research or anything, but this anime blogger who sadly doesn't. His blog is gone now, but he was called 2D Kaleidoscope. Had written about Yokohama Kaidashi Kiko and how that show, which takes place in a post-apocalypse Japan, and the attitude of it is just to fade away.
Yep.
Like it's like humans are just going like, well, there's nothing we can do, shikata ga nai, and they're just kind of biding their time until they all die out. And like that's kind of the nature of Yashike. It's this weird apocalyptic kind of feel to it. But you're just supposed to chill out and wait for the inevitable end, I guess. Yashike is dark.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's secretly very dark. It's because it's kind of a genre about wasting your time, not really being in search of anything. It's like Zen. You're just meant to exist with these characters in this world, you know.
Yeah, it's a very interesting sort of subsection with very fascinating historical markers
Origins.
devoted to it. Yeah, it's very, very interesting.
I'd never heard the term Nichijoke until I joined this call and you were talking about it, but I understood what it meant immediately. So, yeah, I like it as a term. Like I was like, oh yeah, thank God there's a word for it other than slice of life, which is so fucking like I would consider like Cowboy Bebop a slice of life show. You know, like each episode is just a slice of these characters' lives, but like Nichijoke has a much clearer definition to me of like, oh yeah, if it's just a show about literally what would be the everyday life of a normal person, you know.
Yeah, it's well, that's sort of like, you know, that's sort of one of the reasons why it's sort of useful to use these terms that can seem at first pretty alienating, but you know, they hit on very specific things, and they're very good shorthands for hitting on those things. Because Nichijoke, I believe, was originally coined by Kinuma Junpo, and that was the basic idea of a Nichijoke show was, you know, it's a show entirely on foreground. It has virtually no romance, and the whole point of of a Nichijoke show is that it's not supposed to quote unquote get anywhere. It's mainly supposed to emphasize the existence of this everyday that keeps on going.
Yeah. So I mean, I would like basically any 4-koma adaptation is kind of in that realm, I would think.
Yeah, actually, the Nichijoke became incredibly popular as a result of Azumanga Daioh, but so I don't know. You might enjoy this tidbit, Digi, but Nichijoke is treated very seriously, pretty seriously. It's also called Kukike, if anybody is interested. It just means atmosphere type. Yeah. But Nichijoke are treated actually very seriously in Japanese cultural studies because of how influential Lucky Star and K-On! Were.
Yeah, K-On! I really wish... This is like the moments I feel like flying off the handle and going full academic otaku boy is because of the fact that like I think the understanding of K-On! Between Japan and the US is like so vastly different that like K-On! Was this unbelievably successful show that like broke out of its market and had like the highest Blu-ray sales ever and was like a cultural landmark series where the town that it takes place in is like a fucking tourist destination and you know, and famous anime directors will say it's their favorite like the guy who directed I think Black Lagoon, he had an AMA on Reddit once and they were like, what's your favorite anime? And he's like, K-On! And I'm like, this guy gets it, you know, like it's launches the career of Yamada Naoko, seen as like one of the greatest up and coming Japanese directors, but because of what it is and what the Western anime fandom is by and large about, it just is not seen that way. Here it's like a controversial show where you have to like I have to play defense for this show that by all rights should be thought of as a classic. It's like if I had to argue why The Godfather is good, you know, like everyone should like, even if you don't like The Godfather, there's this overall understanding that it's considered a classic and that there's like a certain respect for it. And K-On! Has not gotten that when I think it deserves it. It's a show that like that should be regarded as like, let's study this the same way we do Akira and Cowboy Bebop and Ghost in the Shell, you know. But it's not the aesthetic that got us into anime here in the West.
Even in the scant academic reading that I've done, K-On! Has showed up because it does have that weight to it. I think part of it is a time and place thing in terms of the West. In the Moe Manifesto, they note that I think in 2009 there was, in I believe Otaku USA, a big series of pieces on Moe, and so you had people like Daryl Surratt, sort of the old school sci-fi mecha-based anime fans, airing their gripes with Moe.
Yeah, I can't imagine trying to listen to Daryl Surratt talk about Moe, and I know him. I mean, I've never talked to him or anything, but like he's been around forever, longtime anime writer, and this is a guy who's mostly been about hyper masculine shows. I believe he's the one who runs the best anime deaths panels at Otakon every year. Like, he's a guy who's known for his machismo taste and running Anime World Order, which was, I believe, pretty staunchly anti-Moe back in the day. So like, yeah, it's hard to like think these were the premier anime writers of 2009, and what is their take on Moe? Like, right. I don't know if I want to hear that that take on Moe.
2009 was sort of the tail end of that era of the initial critics of anime before you got kind of a new wave. YouTubers are obviously fairly prominent now, some of them, and so you still had a generation running things who grew up on Bebop and Akira and Mecha, who just are predisposed towards not appreciating Moe.
I mean, having been in the Western fandom since, you know, I was around when K-On! Came out, and it was so, like, even the reception of it now versus back then is so vastly different, because K-On! Was just shat on when it came out. Like, it was absolutely reviled in the circles I was a part of. Like, people were really shitting on it all the time. And I mean, part of that's because season 1, you didn't really see where it was gonna be, you know, what it was gonna become in the long run. But like, the mere idea that K-On! Had a plot was something that like me and my friend Ghost Lightning were arguing for. Like, he had a post called like a plot to put a plot in K-On!, and it seemed like a massively novel idea. Like, this idea like, what, K-On! Has a, what are you talking about? That is complete nonsense. Even to me, like a fan of the genre, I was like, I don't know, man, K-On!'s kind of you know. And then like years go by, and like I remember in 2009 on 4chan, if you were on the A board, whether or not Moe was killing anime was an everyday discussion, and now A is like all Moe all day, you know. Right. And K-On! Is seen as a classic, and there's almost every day there's a gigantic K-On! Thread of people talking about how it's the greatest show ever made. You know, this idea that K-On! Might be one of the best anime ever has really proliferated. You know, I've kind of been at the heart of some of it. I have a lot of my viewers who have turned on to the show and now are huge fans of it. So like, even though it's not regarded like The Godfather yet, it's definitely getting in that direction, I think, and maybe it'll be there in 5 years. Maybe eventually we'll live in a world where everyone gets what K-On! Did. But yeah, it was really like a hard battle getting there.
Do you think in this
that fandom?
Part of K-On!'s big backlash in the West, as opposed to any other cute girls show, was its popularity in Japan? Like, was there something that it was a reaction to?
I think it was because it was Kyoto Animation.
Okay.
And because Kyoto Animation was kind of seen as like the face of Moe because of, I mean, Haruhi was a really big deal. Then Lucky Star was a really big deal because of Haruhi being a big deal. And Lucky Star had, you know, this fervent, like, I really started seeing the anti-Moe thing around when that show came out. And it became like, it was funny because a lot of people were accusing Lucky Star of just being the same thing as Haruhi, which is funny because they're not really that much alike. And then when K-On! Came out, it was, this is just Lucky Star again. Kyoto Animation are just doing the same thing over and over again. And that's sort of the tenor of the conversation, that like, because it was KyoAni and their shows had been successful, there was more attention paid to K-On! Than, say, Hyako, which came out the same season. And it's like the same kind of show, but no one talked about it.
I know in 2007, this went over in the Moe Manifesto as well, there were Moe marches. They had a long title for, it was the Moe something coalition, and they would march through Akihabara, a lot of them cosplaying as like Haruhi, and clashing with the anti-Moe forces in Akihabara.
That sounds epic.
So a battle of sorts played itself out between the Moe and anti-Moe factions of the anime fandom around 2007.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I was a pretty staunchly pro Moe guy, especially because I was like an anti-plot guy back then. I like was arguing that plot didn't matter at all, and it was all just about characters and stuff like that. So yeah, I think the tenor of conversation was just a lot different back then. Like, we were kind of on a different analytical wavelength from where we are now, because it was so much more about like taste and who has good taste and what does, like, am I a bad person for liking this show, you know, which I mean is still a part of the anime community, but like it's backgrounded now, I think, to more analytical conversations, thankfully. God, we have been rambling for a while, and I don't remember why we're on this tangent. Was there another term? Oh, yeah. So here's another term or a series of terms that I think is interesting to talk about, because similarly to the idol thing, there's a culture around this, but some of its terms have kind of leaked out and are maybe being misused, which is boys love and yaoi and stuff like that, and that culture. Because every time I make any mention of any show of that nature and I use the wrong terms, someone will show up on my video and explain to me a whole load of terms I've never heard of that I'm just completely lost about, and I have to think, you know, this subculture runs so deep that for me, like, when I talk about, like, let's say the movie Dokyusei, which I really loved, I thought it was a great anime movie. I don't know anything about it in the context of boys love fandom, but I know it means something very different to them than what it means to me, and that there's a whole lot of terms that they would ascribe to this movie that I would never have heard of, you know. Do either of you know much about this culture and its subset of terms?
Well, boys love is really vast, so we'd have to sort of hone in on very specific things. It is equally vast and complex as otaku, which, you know, a lot of people, when they talk about otaku, they sort of they miss the dominantly female side, which is, you know, the fujoshi.
Yeah.
And I think that's because it's odd, because when I use like, if I say, you know, if I talk about a BL show, then someone comes in and hits me with all these terms, what it makes me think is, where the hell is this discussion happening? You know, like, I suddenly hear 50 terms I've never heard of, and I'm like, well, clearly people are talking about all these terms somewhere. Is there just like an other girl's side of the internet that I just am not privy to? What's
That's
going
where they
on
were hiding
here?
all this time.
Yeah. Well, it happens it's kind of like with like Tumblr culture, where Tumblr has developed so many words for so many different things, and then they kind of expect the rest of the world to acquiesce to it, and we're just like, I'm not even a part of this conversation. What are you talking about? Where have you come up with all these terms that I'm expected to know, apparently? And I feel similarly about BL, where I'll, you know, accidentally describe something as yaoi that is not, and I'm not even going to, I think I know what yaoi is supposed to mean, but I'm not going to say because I could be wrong. So, like, I can't, like, I mean, I just use the term because I've been in the anime fandom for 15 years, and I remember back when you walked around at anime conventions with something called a yaoi paddle and smacked people with it, and, like, it just meant guys love each other, you know, or have sex. The distinction between yaoi and boys love, or between that and shonen ai, which I believe is the same thing as boys love, but then again, maybe I'm wrong. You know, and then fudanshi, sort of a newer term, I think. The difference between a fujoshi and something else, the difference between fujoshi-oriented manga and just gay-oriented manga, which someone pointed out to me that those are two different cultures, which I totally believe, and I can see it easily, though I haven't seen any gay manga because I don't think any of it's really been adapted to anime. So, like, yeah, there's just so much going on there that it's like, somehow it makes sense to the people who are a part of it, but outside of it, no one knows what's going on there. And I'm like, we definitely need a YouTuber who's a part of this to explain all this shit, because I'm completely lost.
Yeah, I think there's very little of it that gets adapted into anime, and very little of the manga that gets translated and brought over to the West. And so that's sort of where you get that gap. It's the people
Yeah.
who are reading the manga scanslations who are really in this culture, and there's just not much of it present for the rest of us who exist outside of that.
Definitely. I mean, in spite of how much anime aimed at women is coming out now, like, and that's the thing, the conversation surrounding it is, oh, Fujo bait. You know, like, it's another Fujo bait show. But that it's starting to come to a head now because
Yeah.
for a few years, yeah, there's a lot of shows that are just like empty pandering, you know, what you would call Fujo bait shows. But then now people are trying to say that about Yuri on Ice. And I'm like, hold the fuck on. You know, like,
Fujoshi is definitely one of those definitions that we're gonna have to hash out.
yeah. I mean, it's getting to a point where someone's got to fucking come out and start speaking up about, like, where does Yuri on Ice fall into all this? Like, explain to me, is it a boys' love show? Is it a part of this culture? Does it come from somewhere else? Where does this show come from? Because when people say Yuri on Ice is Fujo bait, I have to think, well, this is nothing like those other shows. This is nothing like a boys' idol show where it's just a bunch of, like, paper cutout personalities and over-designed characters. Like, Yuri
It's
on
not
Ice...
Cute Earth Defense High.
No. Even that, I don't think is... That's, like, more of a weird comedy show from the director of Gintama. You know, like, it almost feels like outside the culture itself, but I don't know that it is.
It played around with the tropes, you're right. It was...
Yeah. Like Cute High Earth Defense Club feels like it came from observing what the Fujoshi thing was and then parodying it.
Yeah.
But then I don't know because I'm not a part of it. And then I see shows that, like, are very clearly not meant for me. And I don't feel that way about Chikyu Buebu, however the fuck you say the full name, and Yuri on Ice. Like, I don't feel like those were... Nothing about Yuri on Ice screams to me this was made for a certain group of people. That show to me just feels like an art piece that happens to have elements of this, you know, it just happens to have a gay romance in it. I don't think it was made for Fujoshi or anything. If anything, it was probably made for Sayo Yamamoto and whatever she likes, you know.
Right. Well, I mean,
ice skating and beautiful men.
Something like a K-On!, which had a surprisingly large female audience.
Yeah.
Which would maybe from the outside looking in fall into that otaku male-oriented moe show.
Very good comparison, I think, between Yuri on Ice and that, where it's a show that, yeah, from the outside looks like BL, but when you actually watch it, you think, well, hold on. Like, any guy could appreciate this if they're willing, if they're not a homophobe, you know? Like, I mean, me and my brother watched it together and loved it, and he watched K-On! With me, and he's not a moe guy. You know, like, these are shows that are... And I don't think K-On!'s going for moe, and I started reading the manga, which is just god-awful. The K-On! Manga is, like, really just, like, lowest common denominator run-of-the-mill 4-coma. Like, there's nothing special about it. It's entirely what the anime added to it that makes it interesting. And I don't at all think the anime was coming from a place of, let's make a moe show. I really think it was coming from, you know, the interests of Yamada Naoko and Yoshida Reiko, like what they wanted it to be, as opposed to trying to cater to an audience. Not to say that they didn't at all. I mean, the show is adorable because people want to see adorable stuff, you know, like, regardless of moe culture.
If you read interviews with Yamada Naoko or any other number of KyoAni staff, they're pandering to themselves. Because they just themselves love cute girls.
Right. And I think it's so important to realize that, like, K-On!'s, like, made entirely by women who themselves regarded the girls as, like, their daughters, as they put it. Like they were saying they would look at the girls and think, oh, she's gonna be cold in that little clothes. Let's put some more layers on her, you know, like they're like babying these characters in a way. It's like, this is not being made for men. You know, like, not to say that it's made for women or anything, but it's not being made for you to stare at these girls and, like, have a moe reaction to them. They're just making characters that they like, you know. And it does fascinate me. There's a lot of different... I mean, not to say that, like, no women ever write moe shows, because that happens plenty, But it's just, I think that fact specifically with regards to K-On! Is interesting. That it's made by like a group of people who I don't think would be trying to make a moe show. And I think so many people just think, well, it's Kyoto Animation. They've made a million moe shows. And it's like, yeah, but all those key adaptations, that wasn't Yamada Naoko.
Right.
That was the other guy, I don't remember his name, the president of Kyoto Animation, I think, who directs most of the shows that aren't Yamada Naoko. And it's like those ones have a very different feeling to them from K-On! Or Tamako Market or Koe no Katachi or Hibike Euphonium,
Yeah. And Naoko
like
has
it's two different genres almost.
She's ushered in a bit of a new era with KyoAni, and there's clearly a new set of people who set the attitude at that studio and sort of run things at this point.
Yeah, I think that's this is, not really relevant to what we're discussing, but I do think it's very interesting that starting in like the 2010s, I think most of the major studios have moved on to a new generation, and we're really seeing that generation's voice come out. And like, I think a lot of the sort of old guard of people who were making anime is fading away. And I think that has more to do with the changes in anime over time than anything else. And it's the thing that people give so little credit to, because everyone wants to blame trends. Everyone wants to say, well, everyone's trying to copy K-On! And that's why it looks this way. And I'm thinking, well, what if it's just that the people who grew up with K-On! Are now making anime? You're like, what if it's the people who got their start on K-On!, like Yamada Naoko, that's like her first directing job, and now she's a major director. So of course a bunch of other stuff like K-On!'s going to come out because now she's a lead director, and she wasn't before. And we're not getting any new Satoshi Kon films because he's dead. And we're not getting a new Yoshiaki Kawajiri thing because he hasn't made anything in 10, 15 years.
Funny you should bring up Kawajiri, because the new Shingo Natsume series that's airing this season, Aka, it's got Kawajiri on storyboards for some of the episodes.
Pretty cool. I think he's done a few storyboard works over the last 15 years or so, but he hasn't done a big production the way he used to. And it's like, there was a style that was just Kawajiri's style. And like, when people think, oh, there's no more badass manly action shows, it's like, well, it's not that there's no more badass manly action shows, it's that there's no more Yoshiaki Kawajiri shows because the man isn't directing movies, And here we've got this new generation. It's like Kyoto Animation's changed, yes, because a bunch of young people who probably worked minor jobs 10 years ago are now leading the charge. Yamada Naoko's only like 37 or something like that. Unbelievably young for someone in a position like that she's in. And like, you see Studio Trigger broke away from Gainax, a bunch of young people probably. This new studio that just formed out of Ghibli staff. Really excited to see what's going on there,
Mm-hmm. And with KyoAni being the poster child for the industry that it is in many ways, tons of young up-and-coming animators, when they're asked for their inspiration, they'll say KyoAni.
Yeah.
That's just the trail of influence at this point.
Yeah, they've kind of set the high watermark for TV anime. I really loved, there was that Omo Ikane blogger I mentioned before. He once was praising Haruhi simply for the fact that he thinks the most important thing it did was to just raise the bar. Like just like outright, what that genre of anime just completely changed because of Haruhi, because before that point it was a bunch of sort of low effort ugly shows, like the whole, like, what people call moe anime, or even just cute girls shows or harems or anything of that nature. Any of those kinds of shows in the early to mid 2000s were kind of shit. And then Haruhi like ups the game so ridiculously far in terms of visuals. And you could say that they already did it with Air, which is beautiful in its own right, but like Haruhi's explosively popular and is this show that like totally changes the game, and now everyone has to try to be Haruhi. And I think that's where like A1 Pictures came from. Like, I think A1 Pictures was like this attempt to try to make that the new standard, where you look at like their first few shows that all just kind of look like Kyoto Animation shows, but like, they're lesser in certain aspects, but they're trying to capture that feeling or that aesthetic of those shows, like Kanagi or something, which is, I believe, Yamakan directed.
Yeah.
Right after leaving.
I have a video coming out that sort of traces a bit of the lineage of the flight from KyoAni and Gainax, when Yamakan left KyoAni and when Gainax broke up a bit. But A1 Pictures, a lot of their early staff that they took on is from those two studios, and that's where you get a lot of the talent.
That's why we have something like Dokyusei that, like, I was so shocked that it was so good when it was by A1 Pictures, and then you look at the staff and it's just a bunch of Gainax and Trigger people, and it's like, right. Oh well, that's why. It's basically just a young generation, but it was interesting too, because like the director of that movie, it's her directorial debut, but you go through her catalog and she's been on like every Gainax and Trigger show of the last 10 years, and it's like, yeah, these are those young people, you know. Now we get to see what the people who worked under Imaishi are going to do in the next 10 years, and that's what's going to shape what anime looks like. And if suddenly there's a bunch of shows that kind of look like Trigger, which is something that's happening, I saw like Canepa was getting mad about this on Twitter, that everyone always says, oh, it looks like a Trigger show, about like shows that are coming out from everywhere. It's like, yeah, it's because Trigger's now influencing the medium, you know, like now everyone like that studio's been around a little while. Other people who came up under it are making their own shows, and now the Trigger look is proliferating, and I'm excited about that, if anything, you know. Right.
And even if you want to talk, I think Saya Yamamoto worked under Satoshi Kon briefly. So probably her kind of brand of auteur directing. And
I mean, she extensively worked under Shinichiro Watanabe, who's
right, you know, that too,
fairly auteur guy himself. So I remember she said, I read some interview with her when I was studying her for my Manglobe videos like fucking 3 years ago, that she had said that like her style came from getting to work on Samurai Champloo and being given so much creative freedom on that show that she like could never go back. You know, like, like it was such an enriching experience to get to kind of do whatever she wanted, that she was like, well, this is how I'm going to direct from now on.
Which is why she's only had 3 shows.
Yeah, 3 shows in 10 years.
Oh. Similarly to Watanabe, the fate of never settling.
Have you? I don't know if I've told this story, but have you heard the story of like how Watanabe got onto Kids on the Slope, which is Masao Maruyama talked about this at Otakon a couple years ago, that he was like, Shinichiro Watanabe didn't have any work and I wanted to give him work, so I like convinced him to do this show, because Watanabe was like, I don't really do adaptations, and he was like, but it's jazz and we've got Yoko Kanno, and Watanabe was like, all right.
That's great.
Yeah,
I love Maruyama so much.
Oh, he's a brilliant man, and when he dies, I'm going to cry like a river. Yeah. Because I know it's coming in the next few years.
Jesus fuck.
Joe, are you still around?
Oh, I'm still here. I'm just listening. I'm still here.
Yeah, I'm sorry we've gotten so off topic. And I don't know.
No, that's
Lachlan,
really
do we have to wrap this up at any point? I know you said you had to go to dinner soon.
We probably have like a half hour still, easily.
Okay. Are there any other terms that you wanted to discuss that you've thought of over the course of this?
Did we ever get to a definition of what yaoi was?
No, because none of us know the culture well enough, so we kind of have to avoid it.
Outside of our realm of expertise.
If someone gives me a detailed rundown of as many BL and yaoi terms as you know, only do this if you're very confident in the comments. If you're definitely a part of that culture and you know all the stuff, give us a list of the terms and what they mean as best you understand them, and I will pin that comment at the top, and everyone can go read that, because I'd love to see it.
So this is actually pretty fortuitous, because my next video series is actually about sort of homosexual renditions in anime and manga. So this is actually really useful.
Yeah.
So generally, the idea of yaoi is essentially it's an acronym. You know, it's an acronym for for yamanashi, ochinashi, iminashi, which roughly translates, if I'm remembering this correctly, it essentially just means no climax, no conclusion, no meaning. And
I've never heard this before. I've heard the term yaoi for 15 years, and I've never heard that it was an acronym. So I'm absolutely fascinated by that.
It's an acronym.
Wow.
And sort of so when we talk about boys love is the commercialization of yaoi. So there are slightly different contexts. Yaoi is sold as boys love, but yaoi is sort of a narrative structure. And when we get into the work of someone like Saito Tamaki, who actually has written about yaoi, and we get to the work of someone like Kotani Mari, which is a very famous Japanese feminist who also has written about yaoi, it's essentially, they oftentimes reduce it down to the idea of pornography for women. And
so does it have to necessarily involve two men having sex, or can there be yaoi that's not gay?
So the idea is that it's a reconstruction of what would be a heterosexual relationship into this sort of hypersexualized lens. So what I mean by that is that yaoi relationships are oftentimes depicted as really heterosexual relationships. They just happen to be two guys.
Is that why the seme
yes.
uke dichotomy is so prominent? Like, it does. Would you say that if it doesn't have a seme and an uke, it's not yaoi? Regardless of how much sex there is. Like, if it's portrayed as a homosexual relationship with no implications of like a more womanly character, would it just stop being yaoi regardless of how pornographic it might be?
Depending on like how close you follow that definition, it might no longer be considered yaoi. But, that's where we sort of get into the challenge of the word itself, because yaoi has a commercial dimension to it. So if it ends up being sold as such, then, to some people that might be the case. But, the idea is just like, a yaoi relationship as it's depicted is essentially this no conclusion relationship that is essentially what we would think to be this heterosexual relationship. It's just the characters just happen to be two dudes.
Right. Would you say that calling something yaoi is comparable to calling it like shonen? Like, it's really just a marketing term as opposed to a genre?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because that's something I think a lot of people don't understand when they talk about shonen and seinen, is that like what defines the term is literally what magazine it's in. It's not the content, like so many people will argue, like if you say this is a shonen anime, and they'll be like, but it's got violence and tits and all that. It's like, yeah, but it ran in a shonen magazine. It's literally, that's all it means, is it's marketed towards young boys, regardless of whether you think the content fits young boys, because that's completely subjective. But there is definitely the objective fact that whether they succeeded or not, they were marketing it to that audience,
That was an extended thread on the Reddit, wasn't it? On one of the posts.
Was it?
I think I was arguing back and forth with someone. They said that Death Note wasn't a shonen, even though it ran in Shonen Jump, because it's dark.
Yeah. Although I think it actually ran in something called Shonen Jump Advanced.
Jump Advanced, yeah.
Yeah, which is like, I guess, slightly old. It's still for young boys,
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to tell me that Death Note is aimed at adults, because it is incredibly basic and easy to understand. It's like people misunderstanding that, you market stuff to teens not because you think it's quote unquote appropriate, but because you think they'll buy it. And teens love edgy shit, like something being fucking Seikon no Quasar is a shonen manga, and that's, even though it's literally about guys sucking tits and fighting with blood, like it's so juvenile that like, of course it's shonen, like what fucking 30-year-old is going to read this unless there's someone with a very juvenile spirit such as myself, I'm not 30, by the way, but I feel like it sometimes. But so it's interesting to think that yaoi would be more like that. And I'm curious, does yuri have the same kind of connotation, though? Because I know that there are yuri magazines, but at the same time, it seems like yuri is also, even in Japan, applied to stuff that's just because it's lesbians, it's yuri. Like, do you think it has the same connotations as yaoi, or is it a different animal?
I think yuri is a little bit more amorphous, because yuri is oftentimes, yuri has this sort of cross-pollination of readers. There are people
Yeah.
whom are, whom sort of like how the Fujoshi would read yaoi. There are people who read, who would read Yuri, but Yuri is also a little bit more. It also has sort of. It also has. I don't really know how to call them, but it also has people whom are legitimately interested by homosexual relationships. It also has
Right.
that group as well, which is really important, I think, because for yaoi, the homosexual community in Japan does not read yaoi.
Right.
They
They
tend
read
not
gay
to.
and bada and
They
stuff.
read.
Right.
They read really. They read gay manga and books that are really, really rough to get through, because
Yeah.
I've been sort of going through sort of the hentai zashi, which are the sort of like, well, not entirely, but they often include these sort of homosexual stories and so on and so forth. They're rough. They are rough to get through.
It's funny. My cousin, who is completely straight, but he has a very strong fascination with gay and bada manga, and will like just read it just because. And like, yeah, I think he likes it because it's rougher, and it is masculine. Like,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you sit around on X hentai or something all day like I do, then you're on the front page, and there's a very clear distinction between the yaoi and the gay,
Yeah.
because the
Yep.
yaoi stuff is going to be two androgynous pretty boys with long wispy hair that look like they were drawn by Clamp or something, and then you're gonna see like this shitty looking drawing of two Dragon Ball Z characters butt fucking, and that's the gay one. And like, like,
One gives me a boner, the other doesn't.
yeah, and I think that's why there's probably more straight men who are into yaoi than there are who are into gay. Like, it's probably harder for like, I'm sure straight men can just kind of project onto the feminine look of the yaoi stuff, as opposed to the just the hard fucking that's going. But then again, there's someone like my cousin who likes the bada stuff because it's so extreme, and it's like testosterone fueled, and it's like the Mad Max of pornography. It's like a
Oh yeah, like,
it's kind of badass in a way.
oh yeah, when you get into stuff like the Barozku, like like all those like the Rose tribes, it's just it's nuts. And there's an entire subsection of academic analysis which looks specifically into how black people are represented and treated in Japanese gay magazines.
Interesting. I don't know anything about that.
It's weird. It's really weird. It's yeah, if you type in Japanese negrophilia, you'll find it.
I definitely want that in my search history. And I'm not being ironic. I really want that in my search history. Japanese negrophilia.
An interesting interview with two manga publishers for... I don't think they were explicitly Yuri manga magazines, which was why the interview was being conducted, because they were sort of talking about introducing Yuri series into those just general
This was
audience.
on either Sakuga Blog or Wave Motion Canon, right? Which one? I think it was on those. I think I know the article you're talking about. I didn't get around to reading it, though. I think it's on Sakuga Blog.
I'd lean towards that. But the authors of those works, the publishers talked about sort of making them into Yuri, because neither of them had been conceived as Yuri series explicitly, even though they involved a relationship between these two females. And so there is some nuance to that definition, and a line between lesbian couples that are or are not Yuri.
I think maybe the distinction, maybe it's just not even understood by, like, I mean, I just read this Yuri manga called Bloom Into You that's published by Seven Seas, and at the end there's like a little bit with the author like explaining how the manga came to be, and he was saying,
I think that was one of them. that was being published.
Interesting if that's the case, because the author is saying like he'd done stuff that's kind of like Yuri adjacent before, and the magazine specifically asked him to do a Yuri manga for them, but the magazine in question was Dengeki Daio, which is like the magazine that a certain scientific railgun runs in. You know, it's like it's an otaku magazine. So he was like he says in there like, huh, Yuri and Dengeki Daio, are you sure? You know, and they're like, yeah, that's what we want. So like it's not a Yuri magazine, but they are considering it a Yuri manga, you know, and I thought that was really interesting because there are definitely Yuri like if you read a Milk Morinaga thing like Girlfriends or something, that is for a Yuri magazine. It is meant to be Yuri, you know, like it's for that audience. But I'm wondering if Yuri fans would see something like Bloom Into You and consider it Yuri, even though it's not in that magazine, or like, you know, is Yuri more broadly defined than yaoi? And you know, I mean, I feel like this question is probably on the same thing that Yuri fans are talking about, because I also kind of feel like I am like a Yuri guy. Like maybe I actually have the most understanding of this because I have been a long time follower of Yuri, and I totally get all the different types of it, and I'm looking at it and going, how would I define Yuri? And maybe I'm in the same position as most of the the Yuri fans or something. But I have no idea how like actual lesbian readers of Yuri feel about it. You know, if that's, I don't know if there is a subculture of that, or if they're kind of in the same boat, because I feel like for a lot of Yuri fans, like there's definitely the Yuri that is like made for guys. This is just about two girls fucking. But I also think that a lot of male Yuri fans want it to feel realer. And I think that's where a lot of the fandom of Yuri manga specifically comes from, because if you try to watch lesbian porn, it's all clearly for guys. Like like live action lesbian porn is all like, this is clearly not what lesbian sex would be like a lesbian relationship. It's just two girls fucking, you know. Whereas with Yuri, there's more of this illusion that like these are actually gay characters who are actually having a relationship. And I think that there's a lot of guys who just like want that. They want a sincere lesbian thing, not even in a sexual way, you know? And so I do think that there's maybe more overlap between what lesbian women want and what Yuri fans want than there is between gay and yaoi culture, you know? So maybe that's why there's less of a distinction. Maybe. At least speaking personally, that's kind of what I look for. Like, you know, I don't like Yuri for like the sexual reason. I just like seeing girls being in love, you know, and if anything, I have way more respect for Yuri when it does feel real. So I guess I'm speaking as a part of the community there. That's my take on it, but I'd like to hear other perspectives.
There's a really interesting autobiographical manga, The Private Report on My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness.
Yes.
I only read the first chapter of that so far, but it seemed kind of, I mean, it seemed interesting, but it's also very like dryly. It's like a Tumblr comic about like that. It's that level of like, this is just literally about my life and how fucking depressed I am. You know.
I read up to where it was fans translated. I think it's just 5 or 6 chapters, but the last one wasn't. It's being published in English in a few months' time here. But that is one that is clearly from that perspective. It doesn't even detail a relationship. It's just her private, lonely experience. Yeah.
But I think that like that manga has been very popular among Yuri fans and guys, you know, who like want that. So yeah, that's why I think that maybe there's less distinction there. But again, I'd love to hear from some lesbian anime fans whether you think, like, do you like stuff like you know, Girlfriends and shit that's pretty popular with guy Yuri fans, you know. So yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that. Do you guys have any more anime terms we want to bring up? This podcast is long as shit, but I'm willing to go for however long we have. Although I do have to use the bathroom again.
Nothing else springs to mind.
Joe, you got any more terms you wanted to discuss here?
Not anything that's really productive. I mean, like, I could be really spiteful to a bunch of people and say
I'm curious.
And say that the definition of Sakaike changed in 2004.
I wouldn't even know what that means. So
Seems like an academic gripe, some high level.
That's definitely above my head, but I'll let you.
A bunch of people.
If anyone knows what he's talking about, feel free to argue in the comments with him.
Oh no.
Any other spite you want to throw out, or should we wrap this up?
No, I'm good.
All right. Why don't each of you plug your channels? Lachlan, go ahead and tell us. Tell our audience where they can find you and why they should watch you.
I'm just the Pedantic Romantic on YouTube.com. I'm the Pedantic Romantic on Twitter and on Patreon as well. Sort of wide-ranging analysis, somewhat similar to Digibro in that I'll cover aesthetics or narrative or even the meta of YouTube itself. Whatever I'm thinking about at the time.
And Joe, you want to plug your whatever you want to plug?
Well, if you think I am a pretentious, wordy asshole, you can check out my channel at Pause and Select, where I go full retard. So
by full retard, he means like way more intelligent than anything else you are ever going to see on YouTube. That is his definition of full retard.
Oh no, I go full retard. And I go full
Gotta check
retard.
out his sandwich review.
Wait, I have a sandwich review?
Oh no, was it a ramen review?
Oh, the ramen video.
So,
no,
yeah,
don't check that out. No.
Pause and Select, a great place to go for highly academic writing about anime, and very well edited videos, I might add.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, thanks again for watching, everybody. I had a great time with this discussion. I think we broke a lot of interesting ground, and hopefully this will help people. Hopefully people will get where we're coming from. I think we did a pretty good job explaining what the hell we were talking about, and maybe this will help more people to get interested in these terms and make it so I can use them more freely in videos and not have to explain myself for 20 hours every time. So yeah, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.